We are so excited to have our next guest with us today. It is Liz Oyer. She was Biden's pardon attorney at the Department of Justice. You might have seen her on CNN or NBC, or even our former employer just had her on a few days ago, 60 Minutes.
And she was on 60 Minutes to talk about one of Trump's really controversial pardons. He pardoned a crypto god, basically. He goes by CZ, and there's a lot of conflict of interest.
Yeah, we obviously have to ask her about that and so many other Trump pardons. So let's get into it.
So, Liz, we're so happy to have you on because this is just such a timely conversation. It feels like every other day Trump is pardoning someone else. And we'll get into those examples. But before we do, we would love for you to tell our audience kind of what the point of a pardon is, because we know it's one of the presidential powers guaranteed by the Constitution. And it's been controversial because of the conflicts of interest that it introduces.
Yeah, the pardon power was given to the president by the founders of our Constitution because they believed that sometimes our justice system can produce results that are too harsh. And the clemency power is intended to give the president the ability to fix those real injustices. But what's so unusual about it in terms of our constitutional framework is that it is derivative of the powers of a king. So the king in England had the power to pardon, and the framers of our constitution decided that they wanted to keep that piece of the king's powers, even though they were creating a totally different system of government.
Whoa, that is interesting. I've never connected it to like monarchy. And you were at the Justice Department under Biden. And when you were there, what were the guidelines in order for Biden to pardon someone? Like, were there a set of criteria that had to be met for someone to get a pardon?
Yeah, there's actually a really detailed document called the Justice Manual, which is basically the Bible for employees of the Justice Department, and it lays out standards for making recommendations to the president about pardons. But the trick is that the president doesn't actually have to follow the advice. At the end of the day, the president can do whatever he wants with the pardon power. The advice of the Justice Department and those standards that have existed for many, many years are really just advice.
And that kind of tees up, has Trump followed the criteria at all?
Not at all. I mean, there have been cases throughout history where all different presidents have granted pardons that didn't meet the criteria, but for the most part, most presidents have adhered to the criteria in most cases. Trump, not at all. I mean, I don't know that there's a single person who's received clemency from Donald Trump who actually meets the standards that the Justice Department traditionally applies.
And we've noticed that most of the pardons that Trump has given have been to state offenses, and we were wondering if he even has the authority to do that.
Well, the president only has the power to pardon offenses under federal law. There was a recent pardon where the president purported to pardon about over 70 people who were involved in election interference in the 2020 election. And those people had state prosecutions, which is not something the president has any authority to pardon. So it'll be interesting to see whether those pardons actually have any effect in practice. But I think those were really more about sending a message.
And just to understand how unanimous this power is, can anyone stop him? Like if Congress or the Supreme Court wanted to intervene, was that even possible?
The only way to really rein in the pardon power would be to amend the Constitution. Once the president grants a pardon, the courts have no ability to overturn it. And because it's in the Constitution, Congress can't even very easily change the scope of the pardon power. So we'd have to amend the Constitution. But actually, we've gotten to the point where people are talking about that as something that maybe should happen because Donald Trump's use of pardons has really been so unprecedented and so damaging and destructive to the rule of law in our country.
Oh, that's crazy. We hadn't heard of that. That would
Yeah.
be like a huge th I mean, do you think they would get enough support from like
Well,
internally?
given that we just had the longest government shutdown in history, Congress couldn't even pass a budget for many, many weeks. It seems unlikely.
And obviously, a lot of this is made possible by Trump's pardon attorney, Edward Martin, who you've actually called one of the most dangerous men in America. And I feel like a lot of our audience probably hasn't even heard of him. So can you tell us a little bit about him and why you say that?
Yeah, he is really a sham attorney, for lack of a better word. He's an attorney, but he really is a political operative first and foremost. And he was originally made his name as part of the Stop the Steal movement. So he was one of the people who was trying to overturn the election results on behalf of Donald Trump. But he also has another job. He's the director of weaponization. So he's been put in charge of investigating cases against the political enemies of Donald Trump. He has tweeted a number of times about his views of the pardon power, and he says no MAGA left behind. He has made it clear that he believes that pardons should be granted to anyone who is loyal to MAGA causes as sort of a reward for their loyalty. So he's playing a very dangerous role, and he's really not a qualified or experienced attorney, and he behind the scenes is doing quite a lot of damage to the credibility and integrity of the justice system.
And we know that he replaced you earlier this year. Can you tell us about what reason they gave you that you were let go?
I was asked to do something that really wasn't in the scope of my normal duties as pardon attorney, which was to help the attorney general identify people whose gun rights she could restore. And I was asked then to add Mel Gibson to the list and to make a recommendation that the actor Mel Gibson get his gun rights back. Really, all I knew about him was he'd made a couple movies that I'd seen many, many years ago. And he has a history of domestic violence. He was convicted of domestic battery of his former girlfriend in what sounded like a very serious case. And he lost his right to own a gun as a result of that conviction. And I was not comfortable making that recommendation. I was told when I made known that I wasn't able to make that recommendation that this was a friend of the president and that should be all I needed to know to be able to make the recommendation. I couldn't do it. It's not safe. And within a few hours of letting these folks in the leadership know that I wasn't going to make that recommendation, I was fired.
So now we want to get into some of Trump's most controversial pardons because we need your take on them. He immediately gave out unconditional pardons to 1,500 January 6 rioters.
Yeah.
And then, really interestingly, a few days ago, he issued second pardons to a few rioters for crimes that happened after the insurrection that were some of them unrelated to the insurrection. Why is he letting them off the hook for everything? Like, is it just to send a message to his base, or what do you think?
He made it clear when he was on a campaign trail that he intended to pardon some of the January 6 rioters. I don't think anyone, or certainly I did not understand that it was going to be these broad, sweeping pardons of everyone, including those who engaged in violence against law enforcement officers. And I didn't realize that he was going to do it on day one of his administration. It really came as quite a shock to see that happen on January 20th. And what happened after that is a lot of these folks had already gotten themselves into trouble again and had new charges that they were facing. And there was some debate over whether the initial pardons covered those additional charges. Some courts found that they did. And in the cases where the courts found that the initial pardon wasn't enough to wipe out subsequent charges, Donald Trump intervened and granted second pardons to some of these folks.
And along these lines, you've spoken about this, we've seen on social media, Trump also pardoned 77 people who tried to overthrow the 2020 election. He just did this recently. And we know you've called this dangerous. Why?
One of the things that's so dangerous about this is what it means for the future. Trump is making it known to his supporters that he has their backs if they get into trouble. If you commit a crime in support of Donald Trump, he will have your back with a pardon. And that really invites future crimes, that invites future election interference, future political violence. The climate that we're in right now is one in which we have a lot to worry about in terms of the safety of our judges, our political leaders, people who take a stand against the administration or really on both sides of the political aisle.
On Sunday, you were on 60 Minutes to talk about how Trump pardoned CZ, who's the founder of Binance, the largest crypto exchange in the world. And for people who don't know, he was accused of failing to combat money laundering. And the reason that this pardon has been so controversial is because most of the money in the Trump's family's crypto firm is from Binance. So if you were still the pardon attorney and this was passed to you, what would your advice and recommendations be?
This is a case in which, under any other presidential administration, the Justice Department would not have recommended that the president grant clemency. It's not clear that the Justice Department's views were even sought under this current administration. One of the things that's so striking about this is that this is a pardon that was clearly done in Donald Trump's self-interest and the financial interests of his family. This person facilitated a huge investment in the Trump family cryptocurrency company that profited members of the Trump family and his inner circle to the tune of probably hundreds of millions of dollars. And there's no interest for the public in somebody like this receiving a pardon. CZ used his crypto platform to, or essentially allowed it to be used to facilitate criminal activity, to funnel money to terrorist organizations, to do some really bad things that are against the national security interests of our country. So the American people benefit not at all from this pardon.
And Trump was actually on 60 Minutes a couple weeks before you were, and he was asked about CZ, and he said, "You ready for this?" He knows nothing about him. Do you
Yeah.
do you believe that at all?
That was a wild answer. I mean, it sounded like he was prepared to drop this bombshell. Are you ready for this?
Yeah.
Heard of him. It was super bizarre. And there's really no, like, whatever the truth is there, it's not a good look for Donald Trump. Either he wrote a pardon for someone without knowing who he is, which is extremely reckless and dangerous, or he's just lying. I think it's more likely the latter.
Yeah, I mean, this conversation is so interesting just about pardons in general because I feel like it invites the question of, intent. Like, why is the president pardoning someone? And even looking back on some recent pardons, Bill Clinton, Joe Biden, pardoning family members, there seems to sometimes be this conversation of conflict of interest. So, from that lens, is what's happening with Trump different from other past controversial pardons?
Well, no president has systematically abused the pardon power on the scale that Donald Trump has. There's no denying that other presidents have granted pardons that were questionable and that rightly caused a lot of criticism. I would say that Joe Biden's pardon of his son was an example of that. But what's different is that that was really not the general way of proceeding in that administration. None of those had the financial aspect that this one has either, and that's another big difference. So that's just really taking the corruption to a new level.
And shifting gears a little, we have to ask you about this because we find it comes up on our show so much, and we need to know how normal it is. So Biden has gotten so much flack for using an Autopen to sign
Yeah.
pardons. Even Trump is representing him on his wall of presidents by just his Autopen signature. Can you set the record straight? Like, was that legal for Biden to use a mechanical signature to sign pardons?
My understanding has always been that it is permissible for a president to use an auto pen to sign documents. And it was reported recently that a bunch of Donald Trump's recent pardons appear to have an identical auto pen type of signature.
No way. Like, why
Oh.
even bother attacking him then?
Yeah, it's very bizarre.